Hello, everyone. Mic's on? Yes. Welcome. This is going to be a really fun panel. I'm Grant Wall. Been covering soccer in the United States for the last 25 years, currently for my own site, grantwall.com, which I hope you check out. And we're going to talk Nashville SC today. And really excited to have all three of these guys here. It's a great story, and they have a lot of information to share about their experience, which is ongoing. It's a success story. And you may not want me to go ahead and say that, but I think it is in progress. It is a success story. Things have gone really well since things got going. I think it's interesting that we're here in Miami. Nashville came into the league the same year that Inter Miami did. I don't know how many of us in the national media thought that Nashville would be by far the more successful of the two so far, but that is the case. They're opening a new stadium soon. And I want to start with Ian. And when we were talking before, you had told me a little bit about Nashville being a completely unique market in MLS. And what did you mean by that?
Well, I think it's a unique place. Forget MLS, which is also important, but as a city, I think wherever you live in the world, wherever you travel to in the world, certain cities have an identity and a culture that's very unique to them, and Nashville has that. And I remember when I was approached about this opportunity by our owner, John Ingram, one of the things that sold me on it was going to visit the city as much as visiting him. And, Nashville's not flash, it's not razzmatazz, it's not bling, it's very laid back. A lot of celebrities live in Nashville because people don't care about celebrities or money or that. And so it really helped us shape the culture of the team to fit that, let's be workmanlike, let's go about this in a certain way. Of course, we want to market our team and grow our fan base and all of those good things, but we do it in a kind of non-boastful way and it's very Nashville way. And we, in my time at Liverpool, they have a phrase, the Liverpool way, and we have the Nashville way, and they're very different, but it's really about, being very Nashville and playing to the local audience. And I'm not sure everybody does that. If you get the community element right, generally, and that means a lot of things, community, but if you get that right, I think you're certainly on the right path in Nashville.
And in terms of models that you looked at, let's go to Mike here. What soccer clubs did you look at? What non-soccer, other sports teams in the United States, did you look at?
We've talked about this before, the idea of how we're going to benchmark our success. And for us, we really kind of felt that for us to be a successful franchise, we're going to sustain success. And we kind of use as a benchmark for us being someone who always be kind of around the line. In year one, trying to be as competitive as possible to, if not make the playoffs, be a team we thought resembled a playoff team. And for us, looking at teams in our league, like Sporting Kansas City or the Portland Timbers, the Seattle Sounders, teams year after year, have had a successful record of being, in essentially like the NCAA tournament, like the Russian roulette one-off cup type matches of a playoff. Once you get into the playoffs, it's kind of hard to differentiate one team from the next. There's a little bit of luck that's involved as well when you think about things like weather and officials, playing home or the road. So for us, maybe trying to look at some best practices from franchises that have sustained success year after year was really important to us. And as you mentioned about some other sports teams, other leagues, I think one thing that sometimes happens in our country when it comes to our sport is people sometimes aren't willing to accept maybe like who we are from the standpoint of not only being a soccer league, but also being an American league. And I think as being one of the only leagues in the world, maybe the only league in the world with a salary cap, for us looking at other American sports leagues for best practices, trying to see which teams been able to sustain success, maybe without having the largest budget. Franchises like the San Antonio Spurs in the NBA, the New England Patriots in the NFL. For us, we looked at a lot of different best practices we're going to draw from, kind of create case studies off of those as well.
And when that came to recruitment, and I want to get into recruitment on the field and off the field, Oliver, in terms of how have you guys approached recruitment, both from the data area that you have a background in, but also other aspects of approaching it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first things that Mike and I chatted about when we were, trying to build this team was looking at like the cohesion of the group, right? I think, we live in this very like player-driven world nowadays, right? Like athletes have, more following than some teams, right? But I think, especially in a salary cap league, having a group of 11 players and then, certainly more on the roster, creating like a cohesion between those profiles, those positions, I think was really important to us. So when we dove into, our player profiles and then obviously using, certain KPIs that matter to us, I think it was important that, we segmented kind of what we were looking at in each position, right? Like, are there multiple types of sixes that we could look at, right? Rather than some generic kind of, this guy's really good, right? So I think us kind of being precise with that questioning in terms of us scouting and looking at different profiles, I think, ultimately kind of helped us really kind of build a team rather than just looking at individual talent.
And Ian, what sort of decision-making apparatus or process did you want to set up in terms of how people came together to make decisions?
Yeah, so I would say we had like 3 pieces right from the outset, and Mike and Oliver were, like myself, were very early in the journey. And, one part of it was technology, and obviously Oliver played a huge part in that. A second part was having a system around recruitment, which is collaborative. So we don't have, just Mike or just the coach or just, there's no single person making those decisions, which happens in some teams, and that maybe is right for them. But we took this very collaborative approach where, us 3, our assistant GM, our chief scout, and our coach are in that mix. Now, we're all fed by information and support from lots of people, but it's a very collaborative system, and I think that's important. It means, many heads are better than one, and then a no asshole policy. So, and genuinely, I mean, like really no egos, and whether it's, in the people we hired in that group or in that team or generally in our team, or whether it's players, it's really important to find the best player for the position as it goes. But we also genuinely take a hard look at the personality of those players, and that makes for a more cohesive group in the locker room. And of course you make mistakes in that area now and again, and you maybe trade those people out, but I think it was really that. It was good technology, good system that was collaborative, but in order for that probably wouldn't work for everybody unless you have the right personalities that can get on and be respectful of each other's view, and so far so good.
I was going to ask you, do you guys ever get into it when you're like debating these things, or how does that process work?
Yeah, we get into it, but I think it's about respect, right? It's like everybody's had a right to an opinion, but as long as mine wins, it's okay, right?
I would argue, as someone who covers this league, there's a couple of decisions you guys made personnel-wise that really have been important. I would argue that getting Walker Zimmerman is arguably the most important single player deal in MLS over the last 3 to 4 years. I really believe that. He's had a huge impact on your team, 2-time reigning defender of the year in the league. He keeps getting better. He's playing very well for the national team. Mike and anyone else, like, how did that deal get done? Why did you decide that Walker Zimmerman was so important for you to acquire?
So we sat down kind of within our group and created very early on our own best 11, and we wanted to have independent thought. So when we did finally get back to kind of collaborate, we'd have some different lenses looking at things. That's been really important for us also. As Ian mentioned, like in this group we have like our round table, to have a former agent, a former player, a former analyst. You throw myself and Ian along with a head coach who's won MLS Cup. You have, from a diversity standpoint, people who see the game a little differently. They see the world a little differently also. So I think a really independent thought makes it really unique. And when we came back, got it all back together with our best 11s, everyone had Walker's name. He was one of the only players we had that was on everybody's list. Now the challenge sometimes when you have players who are that special, that well thought of, is their clubs don't want to part with them. So I think the reason why it probably worked out in our league, obviously the teams had the most money, the expansion teams. For us, told our coach on several occasions that we were trying to create this war chest early on and trying to acquire maybe undervalued players, maybe players that we thought would fit our group, maybe like on lower dollars to try to trade out. But we were really kind of saving our allocation money for a player like Walker. And as we started getting closer and closer looking at our group, what we thought we needed to add, it wasn't a player like Walker, it was Walker. So for our standpoint, I think it came to a point, and a lot of times this kind of trades just kind of transpire. You speak to your contemporaries, different clubs during the course of the year, and you gauge interest in different players. From that standpoint, I think when we talked to the powers be with LAFC, I think when it got to a point where we were offering an amount of money that was probably too much to kind of turn away from, I think it was kind of like an offer they couldn't refuse. And from our standpoint, at the time, it might have seemed like a lot of money. From our standpoint, we just had enough conviction to believe it was the right person to invest in it.
I would also argue it's had a seismic impact on the team that you got Zimmerman from that hasn't been the same LAFC since they traded him away. It's just a massive move. Hani Mukhtar is another guy that I find not every team that signs a designated player in this league gets it right. And this was an important player for you, in the MVP conversation last year. How did that process work in trying to identify who you wanted to sign as a designated player first for the team?
I've mentioned earlier about our positional profiles, and we work very closely with our manager. And I think you find too many teams around the world where a general manager or a sporting director, that group who's making decisions, sometimes will drop a player on their coach. From our standpoint, something Ian stressed very early on, where maybe the coach doesn't pick and choose every player we have, he has a right to ultimately say he doesn't want a player that we're looking at. And from our standpoint, we worked really closely with him to get an idea of what he was looking for in specific roles. And specifically in that number 10 role, there were certain things that he was looking for in a player. And as our director of player personnel, Chance Myers, was kind of scrubbing lists of different players in different leagues. We looked at leagues that we thought maybe kind of translated to our league as far as similar styles of player, game models, how we were going to play. And as we kind of started to scrub that list and kind of narrow it down, Hani more and more looked like a player with a good fit for us. And to not only find a player who was primarily English speaking, to get a player that was for our league at $2.85 million, was at the time was our biggest transfer. But compared to the rest of the league, it was a pretty modest transfer from the standpoint of trying to acquire a DP. So for us, it just ticked a lot of boxes from the standpoint. He just fit what we were looking for both on and off the field.
I think the other thing I would say to that in Mike's favor is, and Oliver and the team, is that if you put in all the work, really do the work and really look at the detail and the science behind it, it's really important then to follow through your work rather than be reactive to the market. So an agent calls you with this player or the coach sees somebody, like if you've done all of the work and you really believe in it, believe in your work and take that step. And we've done that 2 or 3 times where other things have appeared in the final stages and we've been bold enough and brave enough to stick with the hard work that we did and it's worked. So I think that is important, if you invest in people and time and the effort, not to get drawn into because the coach will get the call from an agent and says, so-and-so is going to be available. And that, whilst we have a huge respect for Gary and his decision, we have to go back to the table and say, is that a better or more risky decision off the hoof than the work we've put in here? And Hani's a great example of that. And then believing in it. First year was tough for everyone because it was 2020, it was COVID. But, he took some time to assimilate and find his way. And we stuck with him. And like you say, he had a fantastic season last year. So.
I mean, in terms of the identity of your team, it seems like it was pretty rooted, especially that first season, in being tough defensively and being a hard team to break down. Last season, a bit more scoring of goals, but still defensively very, very solid. When did that decision get made, and how was it made, and how much did that connect to choosing to have Gary Smith be your coach into MLS, because he had been with the team before that?
We spoke about that very early on, about not so much about it being Gary or it being, it was more about if you come into this league as a new team, you kind of like, everyone thinks you're going to be the easy one to beat. You've got to learn the league and you've got to bring the players together, to get them together, to build. And so it's kind of over-ambitious to think you're going to come out of the blocks and be awesome and be able to take on anyone. So let's find a solution, which Mike did the most work on, about how do we make ourselves hard to beat. Let's start there, just like we did with the budget. Let's not spend everything. Let's start with some, and then let's see how we go in the first 6 months, and then let's go again, and just take a very measured approach to it. Because again, not trying to be the biggest team in MLS or the loudest team in MLS or sign the biggest players in MLS. Let's get in the game and see how we go. And Mike can talk about how we took that forward, but that was really the first conversation, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think we have great balance between like humility and ego. I think almost like in a scale, I think how we balance them. And, I think our players and staff believe it can compete with any team in the league. Our goal was to create a model that we thought would fit that. But I think we also felt we had to be humble enough to kind of understand what works and what don't work. I think two people come into the league, especially building a first-year group, maybe a coach or an executive who's not from our league or from our country, and they automatically assume that maybe that they know enough, that they have a game model that maybe hasn't worked before but it'll work here. From our standpoint, we're pretty humble from the idea of understanding what doesn't work. We know we don't know. We know who we are. And rather than kind of hide that, we kind of embrace that. So from our standpoint, for our best practices, we've looked at teams in a league that had a lot of success. Looked at teams that we thought that we could mirror as far as our budget and as far as the model we could kind of create. And I think from our standpoint, we thought the ability of being a team that maybe that wouldn't lose games to start off, be hard to play against, and then add and build from there. And I think whether it was Gary as our manager or even like how we built our group out, I think that was really important.
I remember Mike and I having a conversation about kind of this in the first year, and there's research that shows that when teams get promoted into the Premier League, the ones that are more successful tend to concede less, right? So I think if you viewed an expansion team almost as a promotion, right? I think we felt like if we were going to be hard to beat, concede less, it would allow us to keep building on top of that, right? So I think when we built our squad, obviously and it's less defensive. I think we know that there's going to be expectations off the ball for our players, right? Which I think is different than some of the narrative around quote unquote defensive. But, I think we really focused on that. And then to Mike's point, I think we focused on saying, listen, we're not going to get this all right? There's no shot. So how can we be malleable enough to kind of build on top of that in years 2 and 3? And I think, we've tried to do that, and we've obviously made mistakes along the way. So
I wanted to ask you, Oliver, as well. Data, everyone talks about data. Every team has a data department around the world at this point. But I still run into a lot of data guys and women who say the manager, the team don't really pay much attention to what I tell them.
Yeah.
Did you have to figure out if you would be listened to before you accepted the job, or was that always clear to you that you would be?
Well, I had one of the best interviews with these guys in April before I joined at a pizza shop. I think they were trying to convince me that the pizza in Nashville was like New York. But yeah, no, I mean, the thing that we talked about, which I personally felt was the most important thing to get right, was the structure of the department, whether it's 1 people, 2 people, or 7 people. I think how that data department is structured will ultimately kind of facilitate the usage and people listening to it, right? So I think if you have a centralized, whether you want to call it analytics or analysis department that able is to mutually benefit from all of the tools and information we have, whether it's video, data, just kind of general research, us being centralized and able to kind of have tentacles into every department, I think was important to me, and I think that's how we've tried to build it, and I think we're still learning along the way. I think the other important part from my perspective was, the sequencing of the information we deliver is in some ways more important than the actual information, right? So for an opposition scout report, for example, my belief is for a coach or whoever it is, they're going to kind of formulate a story about the opponent, well before match day -4, match day -5. If we're not able to deliver our research or our data or just information about the opponent before that story is developed, they're just going to keep going, right? So I think we make a big effort to get information into the hands of decision makers and key stakeholders early enough so that it's involved in them developing kind of their own opinions, right?
I do wonder if there is a fundamental difference. Miami came in the same year you did, that Miami might have felt like they had, due to their market, much more demand for getting a really big name, designated player. And it seems like, like the way the LA Galaxy approaches signing, designated players, it seems that you got the sense that that was not the case in Nashville.
Yeah, I think never say never. For us, as I say, we started in a different place. I think that is probably true. I think in some markets, you trying to get a share of voice and a share of the audience is hard because there's so much going on. And we have an NFL team and a big hockey team in Nashville, so similar. But we as I say, celebrity is not really a thing in Nashville. So although there are a lot of them there, it was really about substance for us. And that, that's not, I wouldn't say anything disrespectful about Miami or everyone has to make their own market and their own path for their own market. We've looked at players, continue to look at players that fit that, big superstar level. And like I say never. It just, in that moment, it wasn't the thing for us. And so much of the great work that this team did was around finding real substance in MLS experience. People who knew this league, the weather, the travel, all of the nuances of this league, and building a really solid core to start that with, and then add in some during 2020, again in 21, and again in this off-season as we go into 22. And I think that's a big part of how we've got where we are. Is 3/4 of our players have been running around in MLS games for some time, and that means a lot in this league.
I mean, I don't know how many of you are aware, probably several, I hope. Ian used to run Liverpool. And this is not Liverpool. This is coming to a new country. This is starting in a completely different soccer culture. Just personally, how has that transition been for you?
Some of it's the same. A lot of it's the same. There's a couple of my former colleagues from Liverpool here. We had the same system in recruitment. Michael was here earlier, Michael Edwards, and we worked together. Same format. The scale is different. A little bit more budget at Liverpool, but it's a lot of it's the same. And then the difference is it's about assembling the right people, and that's the same in any club. The nuances are different, and that's why Mike was my first appointment after I was appointed as the first employee, and I knew a lot about player trading that I'd done at Liverpool, how to find the right coach, all of those good things, but I knew nothing about this league. And here's a guy who's pretty much worked in every part of US soccer, one way or another. And so I felt that was the perfect match for us to work together, that bringing my international experience and Mike's domestic experience and putting those together, and then likewise finding the best in class, in Oliver for his. And that's kind of what we did throughout, is let's find people that work for this league, because some of what goes on over there matters, but not a lot.
And Mike, in terms of your domestic background, your experience, what have you found has helped you the most in this job, starting a team in Nashville in MLS?
I always find it interesting when I look at other clubs as they're starting to kind of build their staffs out the same way Ian had done, for it's an expansion team or even a new leadership in a different club, how few people in those roles have actually coached before. And I think the idea of team building, I've mentioned it before. I think it's in some ways it's less about trying to find like the 11 best players and more trying to find the 11 who play the best together. And I think we spend a lot of time thinking about cohesion, not just thinking about. I think in a culture of video games and fantasy football, here's two good midfielders. For us, thinking about Dax McCarty was among the league leaders, and we talk about FPARs, forward passes after recovery. For the 3 years prior to us acquiring him. Where Anibal Godoy was more of a stay-at-home type player, more sideways and backwards passer. He's been among the league leaders in completion percentage passing, which is which for the most part is trying to hold on to the ball, where Dax was more about trying to initiate counterattacks. So for us, it wasn't like, hey, these are two good players. In our mind, they were two we thought would fit really well together. And at the time we signed Anibal, I think it was very controversial from the standpoint. A lot of members of the media, I think, had questioned how much money we were spending. here's just another expansion team doesn't know what they're doing. But for us, I think we had the conviction to kind of stick with our plan, to know what we thought worked and what didn't work, and I think try to find players we thought fit really well together. And I think that's something you find most coaches in sports, whether it's in soccer or other sports, are used to doing, that I think if you haven't had that experience, I think it's challenging at times.
Oliver, have we found in data yet any sort of ways to measure chemistry?
No, and if we did, I probably wouldn't say so. But no, we definitely have not.
We're using a dating app. So.
There's research out there about it, and listen, like the honest truth is, like, we're not doing anything that's that sophisticated. Sure, we have things that matter to us, and I think are important to our ethos, right? Which I think there's so much value add in just doing that, right? But we don't have like physicists on our team. We're not doing spatial temporal models, like, and there's a lot of great research out there. I just think when I talk to these guys, my theory was if we can do some really simple, effective, kind of, I overuse this term, like low-hanging fruit right from the bat, I feel like we're going to get so much value add, 90% there, and then obviously I want to keep going and find the 10% more, but that's really the truth of it. It's not that sophisticated.
I want to talk a little about your stadium. I know you're going to have another panel here where it's going to come up, but what I've seen, it's opening soon. It's beautiful. Every time I look at pictures, it's something updated. How did that come together? And what did you really strategically want to be involved with this stadium?
So it goes back to what I said, the first question you asked about the community and the culture. So the first thing was when I arrived, the owner told me, we're going to build the biggest stadium, the biggest soccer-specific stadium in the United States, of 30,000 seats, to which I thought, that's like almost 10,000 more than most other people. Why would we do that? And his belief and his vision is, I don't want to build it for where we're starting, I want to build it for where we're going, which I love. The second thing is it's in an area of Nashville. For anyone who knows Nashville, it's at the fairgrounds site, which is a very urban, upcoming neighborhood. And in design, we wanted it to fit into that community. So it isn't, a big shiny spaceship. It's made of steel and wood and brick, which is very fitting of that neighborhood. And again, wanting to be respectful for the neighborhood that we're, arriving in. And then, when we talked about community with the team and with the ownership group, it was all about Nashville's this really, it's a city like that on the rise. And so many people like myself coming from other parts of the world to live there, other parts of the country to live there. So let's make it genuinely attractive to all cultures and ethnicities and that type of thing. So real big focus on what are the food choices and do they fit different palates and different price points, which isn't always a thought. It's like sell it high and sell a lot of it. So we've really been thoughtful about that. Music's such a big part of Nashville. We have a performance stage in the corner of our stadium. We'll have live music there the whole time, inside and outside. Really, and it's about, as I say, it's about the community. And when you do that, the construction's been fantastic. We're actually ahead of time, under budget, and we're still 6 weeks away, and we're 20,000 season tickets already, and selling 600, 700 a week. That place is rammed full of people, and I think it's another great testament to really think about your community, rather than just build it and they will come.
How are you guys approaching playing 8 games on the road to start the season?
Yeah, there's only been 3 other teams in MLS history that have played as many or more games that we've played to start a season. It's a daunting task to not only have to do that, but to have to do it from almost as far southeast as you can get in the United States, in Nashville, to play in the Western Conference this year. So to have to play Seattle away, Minnesota away, Dallas away, Salt Lake this weekend. There are certain challenges with that, but for us, we thought going into this season, if we can kind of get through this labyrinth, these first 8 games, having a veteran team, players who are used to being in this league, used to being in dogfights types of games. Each of the games we've had so far have been matches that have gone down to really to the last 10 minutes of those matches. And again, playing some of the top teams in the league. So for us, we kind of felt, Oliver does a progress predictor activity with Gary and I before the season starts, and we try to kind of forecast where we think we have to be. Over the last X number of seasons, 48 plus points have gotten the 7th place team in the playoffs. So for us, we've got kind of a clear picture breaking the season almost in like different chapters. To how many points we should achieve, kind of like for each chapter. And for us, we think we've had 4 points in our first 3 games. There's also only been 3 teams that have played this many road matches to start a season. They've averaged 1+ point per game on the road. So if we can kind of maintain where we're at, we're probably exceeding expectations where we thought we'd be this time.
I think the other thing with what Mike alluded to, that this tracker progress update, I think there's a couple columns that we update. Obviously, the results and the points we're getting and how that relates to kind of what we targeted in the beginning, but there's another column that's kind of points deserved, or like a very rudimentary like expected points model. And I think because the game is it's very cruel at times, right? Because it's so low scoring, and luck's obviously a big factor. I think it's important for us to always have a barometer on like our relationship with luck throughout the season, right? So whether results are going our way or not going our way, what does it look like underneath the actual points that we're getting? Because I think soccer is so unique in that regard. So especially for this road trip, like if we had gotten through with a certain amount of points, but underneath it all, it looks like at certain moments we were just unlucky, rather than hit the panic button, let's just be honest with kind of the context of the situation and how we've been playing. So
I noticed over the weekend, it only took 3 MLS match days for all 28 teams to have dropped points. There's not a perfect team in the league after 3 games.
Yeah.
By design.
The league is designed for parity. It has been from the start. And yet, we've also seen the league points record be broken last season by New England, and not long before that by LAFC with Walker Zimmerman. And I'm wondering, what is it? What do you see actually happening? Is the parity side really happening, and is it getting more so the case, or are these just outliers, LAFC and New England in recent years, or is it both?
I don't have an informed enough kind of opinion on it, right? I think the league's maturing. I think this probably doesn't explain why there's these records being broken, but I think there are more than one way to skin the cat, and I think the product of the league maturing is that there are different styles and different ways to go about it, which I think will explain why you're starting to see some of these teams kind of break records, right? Because I think they have a style of their own, and you can see that success can be brought just by doing things a little bit differently. So, but I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, why recently we've seen those? It's a good question. Yeah.
I guess when you have this sort of league mandated, or the structure is set up to create parity, I get it, but like at the team level, how do you feel about that?
I think I speak coming from a European league, from the Premier League most recently. I love it. I think because the difference is you don't start any season thinking, well, it'll be between those 3 or 4, right? You really can't do that in MLS. And then secondly, as a team, as putting a team together and operating a team, you can look at it and say, what you really want to do is get in the playoffs, because then it's anyone's game, right? So you're setting yourself out, if you take it in Premier League terms, finishing the top 6, 7 in this case, and then you've got a chance of winning the whole thing because it's one and done each round. And so I think equally, when you have a budget to work with, as we do, we're not the smallest and we're not the biggest, you don't have to approach it thinking, well, we don't have the biggest budget, so we have no chance, right? We're not Man City or whatever, right? So I think those things really allow you to, and for the coach and the players, everyone can step over that line believing that they have not just in their minds, I mean, genuinely they have a real chance to win that thing every year. I think that's awesome for the league. I think, it's evolving, as Oliver said, and the numbers are going up each year. But I think in terms of the parity, I think it's incredible.
I mean, earlier, and we'll wrap up in a second here, but like earlier you had talked about how the first season MLS, you wanted to be hard to play against, and you wanted to build on top of that in subsequent years. So in the next few years to come, what might we see from Nashville in terms of continuing to build on stuff?
I mean, look, we're pretty pragmatic in our approach. You know, Ian mentioned before about the fact that every team kind of has a chance to be in it when you think about the parity in our league. And for us, obviously we have aspirations of competing for everything. I've never been around a coach or an executive who didn't aspire to win championships. So I think we'd be negligent to not say that. But for us also, we kind of appreciate the fact, maybe kind of like card counters in a casino. We've got like a clear plan about how to collect points, and I think if we can keep doing that and can keep being in the situation or the equation to be pursuing playoff spots, then we're in that rush roulette situation where we've got at least a 1 in 7 chance in our conference to get the MLS Cup. And if we can keep doing that every year, I think there's law of averages. At some point, it's pretty soon you're talking about a team competing for MLS Cup.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. Really enjoyed this conversation with you and getting to learn even more about Nashville SC. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.